Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment what time you're watching. Now, let's begin. The Archive Shift. My name is Chloe, and I'm telling this story because it involves my roommate, Cassie. She didn't disappear in the woods or off some back road. She vanished from the most secure, soundproofed, concrete basement on the entire university campus. She was 20 years old, and now, 3 months later, the police say they've exhausted all leads. They think she just ran away, but they didn't hear the whistling. Cassie took a summer job archiving old digitized historical film reels in the basement of the university's main library. It was a perfect gig for an introvert. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 6 nights a week. The basement was massive, labyrinthine, and built like a bunker, designed to keep the delicate, century-old film stock at a constant, controlled temperature. The security was insane. 2 swipe cards, a numbered keypad, and a final heavy steel vault door that sealed behind you. Once you were in the main archive level, you were utterly alone. Cassie loved the silence. She'd put on her industrial, noise-canceling headphones, fire up the digitalization equipment, and get lost in the historical footage. She told me the silence was the best part. The low, steady hum of the climate control was the only sound for 8 hours. The 4 notes. About 2 weeks into the job, she started hearing something. It was a very soft, very distinct whistling. The sound didn't come through her headphones, which were powerful enough to drown out a jet engine. It came through the actual atmosphere of the basement, seemingly right out of the quiet. It was the same simple melody every time. 4 ascending notes. C, E, G, A. Repeated, over and over. The first time it happened, she ripped off her headphones and stood up. She walked around the climate control unit, checked the vents, and peered down the long, silent aisles of shelves. Nothing. She reasoned that the old air conditioning units were just humming a weird harmonic tone. But it was too musical for that. The next night, the whistling started again, an hour into her shift. C, E, G, A, C, E, G, A. This time, she realized it wasn't coming from the vents. It was coming from the reel storage vault, the inner room where the temperature was dropped even lower and where the most fragile reels were kept. The vault was always locked when she wasn't actively putting things away. She'd checked the door an hour earlier, verifying the magnetic seal was engaged. She put her ear against the steel, and the whistling was clearer, soft, breathy, right on the other side. She called her supervisor, Mark, on the secure landline. "Mark, I think someone is locked in the film vault." Mark was instantly dismissive. "Cassie, that door hasn't been opened since 6 p.m. It's impossible. No one else has access to the basement-level keys. It's the building settling, or maybe the old air purifier in the vault." Cassie argued, "Air purifiers don't whistle 4 ascending notes." He chuckled. "Just put your headphones back on and ignore it. I'll check the logs in the morning." She tried, but the sound, once acknowledged, became impossible to filter out. It was a constant, unnerving little lullaby of terror, playing softly in the dark. The breach. On the 3rd night of the whistling, Cassie arrived prepared. She set up her phone camera on her workstation desk, pointing it directly at the vault door, recording her entire shift just in case. She put on her headphones and started working, determined to focus. For 2 hours, nothing, just the steady hum. She felt foolish. Then, at 1:37 a.m., she saw a notification flash on the wall monitor that tracked the basement's temperature and humidity levels. It was a standard alert system, but the message was odd. Reel drawer 41B accessed. No user logged. Reel drawer 41B contained the oldest reels, the 1920s era nitrate stock, highly flammable and almost never handled. More importantly, drawer 41B was located inside the locked vault. Cassie ripped off her headphones. The whistling had stopped. The silence that rushed in felt heavy and expectant. She grabbed the landline and called security. No answer. They only monitored the main floor this late. She called Mark again, leaving a panicked, trembling message. Finally, she pulled out her key card, entered the code, and opened the heavy steel vault door. The temperature inside hit her like a punch, nearly freezing. The rows of metal shelves stretched into the dark. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She used her flashlight to sweep the room. It was empty. But when she reached drawer 41B, it was slightly ajar. She pulled it open. The space was empty. The reel that should have been there was gone. Underneath the shelf, on the pristine linoleum floor, was a small, almost microscopic pile of film stock dust. It wasn't the dust from the shelves, which was gray and particulate. This dust was a fine brownish powder, the unmistakable residue from an active digitization machine, like the one she was using outside the vault. And then she saw it. In the center of the dust pile, pressed perfectly into the powder, was the unmistakable, detailed imprint of a bare, naked foot. It was too wide, too long, and too perfectly formed to be a boot or a stray animal. It was clearly the print of a massive, naked foot. Cassie slammed the vault door shut and flew back to her workstation. She grabbed her purse, her keys, and her jacket. She was running, not walking, toward the exit keypad when she stopped dead. Her phone, which she had left filming the vault door, was ringing. It wasn't the landline. It was her personal cell phone, ringing with an unknown number. She hadn't told anyone except Mark that she was even working the shift. She stared at the phone. She knew she shouldn't answer, but the impulse to confront the nightmare was overwhelming. She hit the answer button. "Hello?" she whispered. The line was silent. No static, no breathing, just the dead, heavy silence of the archive basement amplified directly into her ear. Then, cutting through the void, she heard it one last time. Not the voice of a stalker, not a threat, but the soft, sickeningly familiar melody, coming not from the vents, not from the vault, but through the phone's earpiece. C-E-G-A. C-E-G-A. Cassie screamed and threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. She frantically punched the code into the exit keypad, yanked the door open, and scrambled into the hallway, leaving the basement door wide open, its steel vault door swinging slowly behind. The next morning, Mark arrived to find the main archive door standing open, which should have been impossible. The vault was ajar. Cassie was gone. The police found her shattered cell phone, her purse, her keys, and her keycard. They even found the camera on her desk, but the video file was corrupted. It showed only 5 minutes of empty footage before ending abruptly at 1:36 a.m., 1 minute before the drawer access notification. They searched the entire basement, the air ducts, and the vast, dark shelves. The only thing they found was on Cassie's workstation. She had been working on a digitization project for the missing reel drawer 41B. The file was empty, unpopulated, but it had been renamed by someone before she ran. The file name read Cassie_final archived 6:00 a.m. .mp4, the time she was supposed to finish her shift.
The only other thing they found was her noise-canceling headphones, lying abandoned on her desk. When the detective picked them up, he pressed the power button, and a faint sound leaked from the ear cups. A single, repeating, soft tune. 4 ascending notes. C, E, G, A. C, E, G, A.
The Pink Bag. My name is Jess. For almost a year after college, I worked the graveyard shift at the Starlight Diner, which sits right off I-40 in the middle of 100 miles of nothing. You serve truckers, travelers with bad timing, and ghosts. Mostly you just cleaned and waited for the sunrise. My shift started at 11 p.m., and usually by 2 a.m., the place was dead silent. It was a slow Tuesday night in early November. I was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door jingled, announcing a new customer. It was a girl, maybe 19 or 20, dressed in travel-stained jeans and a bright yellow hoodie. She had a massive backpack on and looked utterly exhausted. She sat at the counter, ordered a black coffee, and gave me this wide, nervous smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She told me her name was Lila, and she was waiting for a bus connection that wasn't due until 4:30 a.m. I remember 2 specific details about her. First, she kept compulsively checking her phone, not scrolling, just checking the time, and then glancing anxiously at the diner window. Second, when I served her the coffee, she pulled out a cheap, worn pink makeup bag and set it carefully beside her on the stool. It was the only luggage she kept visible. The big backpack was shoved under the counter. Lila drank her coffee quickly. Around 3:15 a.m., she stood up. "I'm going to use the restroom quickly," she murmured. "Be right back. Don't let anyone touch this, okay?" She tapped the pink bag. "I'll guard it with my life," I joked. She gave a small, quick nod, and then she vanished through the swinging kitchen door toward the back hallway where the restrooms were. I never saw her again. The missing girl. I wiped down the rest of the counter, restocked the napkins, and cleaned the coffee machine. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I kept glancing at the hallway. Her coffee cup was still there, her heavy backpack was still tucked under the counter, and the pink makeup bag sat exactly where she'd placed it on the stool. It was the only luggage she kept visible. The big backpack was shoved under the counter. At 3:45 a.m., I finally walked back. I called out, "Lila? Are you okay?" Silence. I pushed open the women's room door. It was empty. The window was small and painted shut. The back door, which led only to the dumpster and the locked service yard, was triple bolted. There was nowhere to go. I called the police at 4 a.m. By 4:30 a.m., Sheriff Hayes arrived, already skeptical. He checked the service yard door, locked. He checked the small window, unopened. He found no evidence of a struggle, no blood, nothing. It's like she dematerialized between the counter and the bathroom stall. The only things left behind were her possessions, the backpack, her phone, dead, and the strange little pink makeup bag. The anomaly of the mirror. The police took the backpack, but they left the small pink bag with me. "It's just makeup, Jess. If she turns up, she'll want it." I put it under the register. The next night, I was back on shift. The diner felt different, cold, exposed. I kept watching the back hallway. Around 1 a.m., I went to the women's room to wash my hands. The mirror above the sink was large and slightly tarnished with hard water spots. When I used it the night before, it was dirty. Tonight, it was pristine, perfectly clean, as if someone had just used glass cleaner on it. It gave me a jolt, but I reasoned the day staff must have done a deep clean. I got back to work. At 3:15 a.m., the exact time Lila had left the counter, I heard a sound from the back hallway. A soft, metallic clink, like a zipper being closed. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the counter and walked slowly back. The hallway was empty. The restroom door was closed. I listened. My breath held tight. Nothing. I went into the women's room. The mirror was still spotless. But this time, written clearly on the glass in what looked like dried lipstick, was a single, tiny word. Wait. I screamed, dropping the bat. It wasn't a prank. The diner had been locked all night. I ran back to the counter, my whole body shaking. I grabbed the pink makeup bag, the one Lila left behind. It was cheap, with a stiff zipper. I pulled it open. Inside, there was only one thing. A half-used tube of bright red lipstick. It matched the color of the writing on the mirror exactly. The final exchange. I called Sheriff Hayes again, frantic. He came, saw the word, and suggested I might be emotionally compromised, and that the lipstick was likely just smudged from a previous customer. He wiped it off, checked the doors, and left, leaving me alone with the silence. I spent the next 2 hours huddled behind the counter, staring at the empty stool where Lila sat. I knew she hadn't run away. I knew she hadn't left the building. At 4:30 a.m., the time her bus was due, the phone behind the counter began to ring. It wasn't the regular landline. It was the emergency line, the one that had a direct, unlisted line to the police station for emergencies only. I picked it up on the first ring. "Hello?" I whispered. The line was dead silent for a moment. Then a voice, high-pitched and choked with a sound like wind going through dry reeds, whispered, "I can't wait anymore, Jess." It wasn't Lila's voice, but it was desperate, terrified, and utterly real. I threw the receiver down and fled, leaving the lights on, leaving the counter wide open, and leaving the little pink bag where I'd dropped it. They found the bag the next morning. It had been moved. It was sitting on the sink in the women's room, right beneath the clean, reflective mirror. The police still think Lila ran away. They still think I had a nervous breakdown. But I know she's still there, somewhere between the counter and that locked back door. And sometimes when I drive past the Starlight Diner late at night, I swear I can see the reflection of a frantic yellow hoodie standing motionless in the dark glass of the window, waiting for me to come back inside and check the counter. How I stayed sane during the first 3 weeks after my roommate, Maya, disappeared. If I told you what I saw, you wouldn't believe me. But it's the only truth I have left. We had just moved into an old, sprawling rental house near campus for the summer. The house was charming, but full of quirks. Drafty windows, a heating system that made unsettling clunking noises, and a living room ceiling fixture that always seemed to have a flickering bulb. Maya, who was vibrant and chaotic, loved it. I just saw deferred maintenance. On a Friday night in June, I came home late from my job. Maya's bedroom door was slightly ajar, which was unusual. She was obsessively neat. Her phone, which she treated like an extra limb, was gone. But her wallet, keys, and laptop were still sitting neatly on her desk. She didn't own a car, and the door was double-locked from the inside. She had simply vanished, without a trace, leaving behind everything she would need to function. The police were polite, but firm. They called it a voluntary departure. A note, they suggested, could be hidden. A secret rendezvous. But I knew Maya. She wouldn't leave her keys, and she certainly wouldn't leave her expensive new phone behind. The source of the cold. It was the living room light that first unsettled me. It was an old fixture with 4 exposed bulbs. One of them, in the front left socket, had been flickering for days. After Maya disappeared, the flickering stopped. Now, that specific bulb was just on. Not brightly on. It emitted a dim, persistent, sickly green white light that looked like moonlight filtering through bad glass. It was so faint you barely noticed it during the day. The first night I was alone, I decided to fix it. I flipped the main light switch off. The other 3 bulbs instantly went dark. The green-white one stayed lit. My heart
gave a tight, unnatural jump. I flipped the switch on and off half a dozen times. 3 bulbs responded instantly. The 4th one remained fixed, unblinking, casting its low, cold glow. I tried to rationalize it. A faulty wire, maybe. Residual charge in an old capacitor. The next morning, I unscrewed the bulb completely. I held the glass sphere in my hand. It was cold and normal. I looked up at the empty socket. The light was still there. It wasn't a bulb at all. The light was emanating directly from a tiny, precise spot on the plaster inside the empty socket, about the size of a quarter. It was fixed, static, and absolutely impossible. I took a ladder and went up to examine it closer. The light was silent, cold to the touch, and seemed to have no heat signature whatsoever. It wasn't phosphorescence or mold. It was a clear, greenish-white pinprick of pure light coming from the wall where there should only be dark plaster. That night, I went into the main breaker box in the garage and cut the power to the entire house. The darkness was total and suffocating. But when I went back into the living room, the green-white spot in the ceiling was still glowing. It wasn't using the house's power. It was drawing its energy from something else. The whisper. From then on, the light became my sole focus. I couldn't sleep. I just sat on the couch, staring up at that quarter-sized static glow, convinced it was somehow linked to Maya's absence. And that's when the sounds started. They weren't loud. They were so faint they were barely audible over the hum of my own breathing. When I looked directly at the light, I would hear a sound, like a muffled, choked whisper coming from the spot itself. It was the sound of someone trying desperately to speak through a thick layer of fabric or water. I started talking to it, whispering back, "Maya? Is that you?" I got no response, only the choked, gasping sound. One night, around 3 a.m., I brought a wooden chair into the living room and stood directly beneath the socket, staring up at the static light. I was shaking, terrified, but needing confirmation. I brought my ear within 6 inches of the glowing spot. The choking sound intensified, becoming a frantic, rhythmic struggle. Then, cutting through the static noise, I heard 3 words spoken so clearly and distinctly they felt projected directly into my skull. "Don't look up." The voice was unmistakably Maya's, not her vibrant and chaotic voice, but her voice terrified, strained, and warped by the awful green light. I stumbled back, knocking the chair over. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the landlord. They would institutionalize me. They couldn't explain the light, and they certainly couldn't explain the voice. I spent the rest of that night backed against the far wall of the living room, watching the light. It wasn't just light. It was a scar, a window, or maybe the last vestige of her consciousness trapped in the structure of the house. The next morning, I packed only my essential clothes, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door, never looking back. I paid the summer rent in full, never told the landlord why I was leaving, and moved 3 states away. 3 years later, the police still have Maya listed as a runaway. My logic insists she's simply left, but every time I turn off a lamp, I check my ceiling expecting to see a dim, unblinking, green-white light glowing back at me, a fixed reminder of the night my rational world broke and the house consumed my friend.